Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to talk about how I got into medical school and provide tips that might be useful to future prospective candidates. So a little bit about my background. I did my undergraduate education in University of Connecticut. I ended up doing my medical school training in University of Colorado in Aurora, Colorado. I then went on to pursue anesthesia. I did a transitional year program in Reading Hospital in Pennsylvania, then moved to Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, where I pursued my anesthesia training as well as pain medicine fellowship. In this video, I'm going to focus on medical school and what I did to prepare myself for the application season. Now, it goes without saying that academics play a huge role in the medical school application process. GPA and MCAT scores go a long way. However, the focus of this video is to talk about the non-academic things as well that could make your application a little bit better and more optimized for the medical school application process. Now, I did pretty well in my classes in college, but I'm not a very good standardized test taker. So my GPA was pretty high, but that was negated by my pretty low MCAT scores. So I had to figure out other ways to help improve my application for medical school. So I decided to focus on non-academic things to make myself a more well-rounded candidate. From an extracurricular activity standpoint, I tutored middle school students on random subjects including English and mathematics. Another extracurricular activity I did was volunteer my time speaking English with international college students and help them get better in communicating using the English language. Perhaps my most important extracurricular activity was volunteering my time at a local emergency department. I spent a lot of time at a local emergency department at Hartford Hospital in Connecticut, where I engaged in a lot of quality improvement projects. I also had the opportunity to do a project that involved smoking cessation, where I talked with patients who had a history of smoking, and I helped refer them to the tobacco quit line to help them quit smoking. I think this is probably the most important part of pursuing extracurricular activities. If you have the opportunity to pursue an extracurricular activity, do one in the healthcare setting. You are applying for medical school. It does not make sense if you don't have any interaction, any exposure to patients. It's hard for the medical school to determine if you know as a candidate what you're getting yourself into. In short, you want to do at least something that shows that you've interacted with patients, preferably for at least 3 to 6 months. Now, next comes the research thing. I've always loved research. I've done a variety of research projects spanning the basic sciences, clinical sciences, educational research. I think that research should not be a requirement. A lot of medical school applicants do end up pursuing it to make themselves a more well-rounded candidate. My advice is only do it if you really like it. In retrospect, if I had to go back and change things, I likely would have pursued more clinical research projects as opposed to basic sciences research project. The primary reason for this is because there's a higher likelihood of getting more peer-reviewed publications in clinical research, in my opinion. Nonetheless, I ended up doing a lot of basic science research for 3 years. My research project was focused on doing various basic science techniques and genetics research in fruit fly cells. Despite 3 years of hard work, it only ended up yielding 1/3 author publication. Whereas if I probably put that same amount of time in clinical research, I would have probably had about 3 to 4 publications at least. Next comes employment. Now, this is an often overlooked field. While paid endeavors don't hold as much weight as extracurricular activities where you volunteer your time, I do think that certain employment endeavors could actually go a long way in the medical school application process. One of my passions is teaching, and I wanted to embody that in my various employment endeavors. And so one thing I ended up doing was tutoring college athletes. That was one of my jobs. Another job I had was tutoring underserved college students in organic chemistry and physics. And then finally, going along that line of teaching, I also engaged in a lot of orientation workshops for incoming freshmen. One of the workshops that I probably spent the most amount of time on was violence prevention against women. Thus far in this video, we've talked about several domains. We've talked about academics, which is important. However, we also discussed other parts where applicants can make up ground to help improve their application. So for example, extracurricular activities where it's very important for the applicant to do something in the healthcare field and interact with patients. And number 2, we talked about research endeavors. However, only do that if you're really, really interested in research and you feel like you can achieve publications, for example, or present at conferences. And number 4, we talked about employment and how you should try to pursue employment in a field that you're passionate about. This 5th category I'm about to talk about is the intangible category. I think that's probably the most important category out of all, because this is where applicants can make up most ground in terms of optimizing and improving their chances for getting into med school. Now, the tangibles category is very multifaceted. I think it includes things like professionalism. Hard to assess professionalism until you actually make it to the interview phase. However, other things in your application can inform on how professional you are. For example, your letters of recommendation can describe your professional characteristics and how you interact with other people and other members of the healthcare setting. Now, when people think about professional, they think about how a person looks, how they talk, but it's actually a lot more multifaceted. I think professionalism also involves interacting with other staff members and how well you can work within a team to help improve patient care and patient outcomes. You can also exhibit your professionalism by helping other members of your team, for example, putting in the extra work and extra step, staying late hours to complete a task, for example, making sure you always offer help to other members of the team. Now, another intangible characteristic is that many medical school applicants have led previous lives. And what I mean by that is that they might have had careers for a long term. They might have had other interests that they pursued prior to applying for medical school. Each medical school applicant is unique, and you need to be able to express that and show that you're unique in that perspective during your medical school application process. I think my medical school class was actually very diverse. We had a bunch of people who led other professions for long periods of time prior to pursuing a medical degree. We had teachers, we had pharmacists, we had scientists who have done it for 5+ years and then decided to pursue a medical degree. I think another intangible characteristic is your personality. That's very important. It's very subjective and hard to assess. Most of this is determined during the interview process, where an interviewer tries to gauge what type of person you are, your personality, your work ethic. Oftentimes, interviewers will try to self-identify and see if the interviewee has certain traits and characteristics that remind them of themselves. This is why I think it's very hard to judge and determine what a person's personality is like and what traits they have. Now, when you think of the healthcare setting, there are various traits that are more desirable. So having compassion and empathy during your delivery or care for patients is very important. Another very important trait for medical students especially is their teachability. Now, teachability is important during your course of education because it shows that you're willing to accept feedback and make changes into your study habits, for example, or the way you deliver care for patients, or just learning a concept in general to help improve your knowledge base while you care for patients. If you have a medical student who is very arrogant or thinks that they know it all, that person might not be very teachable, and that's very important during medical school, because in medical school you're going to be embarking on a journey where everything is new and you're learning new things that you've never heard of before, and it's very important to be able to be willing to accept feedback as you learn something new. In addition, it might not be very pleasant to work with arrogant people in the medical setting because they might not be willing to accept feedback from the rest of the team members, and thus they might affect patient care. And probably the most important intangible characteristic is what makes you unique. The goal of medical school is not to train the next generation of machines or robots. Their goal is to train a diverse workforce. So what makes you unique? You need to sell yourself and show what type of person you are and that you have a personality. So when I interviewed for medical school, there are a couple of things that I highlighted during the interview process as well as in my personal statement. I loved artwork. I used to do a lot of paintings and shadings. I've also published a bunch of artwork in various anthologies. And so I went on that and I described that a lot to my interviewers as well as in my personal statement, as I think that's pretty unique and makes me different from other people. Another thing that I highlighted as well was my background in living in various countries. I was born in India. I lived there for a long time, and then I moved to Kuwait, where I did part of my elementary school training. Then I lived in New York City right after that when I immigrated to the United States. I lived there for about 4 years, where I did a part of elementary school, moved again from there, went to Connecticut, and I did my high school training as well as college training. I believe that me living in different countries, engaging with various diverse cultures, and having to adjust constantly to different types of environments went in my advantage, because I was able to meet different people, interact with different people, and get more experience, more life experience. And I think that went as an advantage to me during my application process. So to summarize this video, I think there are 3 high points that should be taken. Number 1, academics is important, but you can use other things in your application process to help up your application, such as the intangibles that I just discussed. Number 2, make sure you do extracurricular activities, particularly in the healthcare setting. If you only had time for one extracurricular activity, make sure that it's in the healthcare setting. Number 3, make sure you embody various desirable traits. These include empathy, compassion, teachability, and work ethic. Now, work ethic might be very hard to display. Despite you having an excellent CV, it's very hard to actually demonstrate work ethic. But these will come out and these will be very evident in your letters of recommendation, for example, and as well as during the interview process. I think work ethic is very pertinent, especially in our medical field, because medical school is just the beginning. A lot of people end up coming to medical school thinking that they'll just make it there and they'll be done. But actually, medical school is just the beginning of several years of long hours of just learning new things and taking care of patients. There's 4 years of medical school, then there's several years of residency, and then potentially fellowship afterwards. So it's just the beginning. Burnout is a real thing in the medical field, unfortunately, and making sure you select candidates who not only display a very good work ethic, but are also very resilient and are able to withstand rigorous training is very important. Thank you everyone for your time and attention. That concludes this video. Please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. I also look forward to hearing your comments, particularly if there are any questions regarding the medical school application process.